A lot of people are rolling in. I'm happy to have such a good crowd here. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we're with Luke Greenfield, who's the director of Half Brothers, as well as the co-writers Jason Shuman and Eduardo Cisneros.
Hi everyone.
Woohoo! Really excited to all be here today. I'd ask by show of hands who watched the film earlier, but we don't really have that much here, so I'll just assume that you all have, that you've done your homework. So Luke and I were actually talking earlier, and I think rather than starting with the film itself, we kind of wanted to start with a little bit of the career trajectory that sort of went from, because two of Jason and Luke, you were both USC alumni, and so we really wanted to sort of tie in that path. So Luke, your first film was The Animal, which came out some years after you graduated.
Yeah.
But there was a short before that was kind of the turning point that you said really was.
Right Hook.
Yes. Tell us about that journey a little bit, that starting point.
The Right Hook is a film that if I made today, I'd be in jail. Yeah, no, I came out of USC, super excited. I'd made a 480 film, and I think, at 21, 22, I was just kind of hit with the reality of our business, as far as how it really works. And so those years after film school were rough. It was more of like, am I going to starve to death? What's going to happen here? And then I kind of begged, borrowed, and stole money to make this short film called The Right Hook. And I was just lucky enough to get a lot of attention from that short film. And, even before I had finished that short film, I was hired to do this Rob Schneider, Adam Sandler movie called The Animal, which I had never seen. I'd never seen a Rob Schneider film before that meeting. So it's funny, like I just remember there's an interview and it's like Sandler, his producer, Rob Schneider, all these people around, like making a circle around me. And it was like an interrogation. They were like, so what are your favorite comedies? And I was like, Midnight Run. At the time, it was like Midnight Run, Flirting with Disaster, Office Space. You could see their faces like, the fuck is he talking about? And then like, I kind of looked at their blank faces and I went, and Deuce Bigelow, of course. And they were like, oh, of course. Okay, good. You're hired, kid. And that was it. Like I went on to make this kind of very broad, I'd never directed anything I hadn't written at that time. So it was kind of a crazy situation. So that's kind of my raw beginnings into like, I guess, studio filmmaking.
Well, and you had said earlier too, one of the biggest, you learn a lot of lessons about how to make a film in that first process, but you said actually for you, the big lesson was kind of how you're navigating the studio project. Because one of the big differences between The Animal and Girl Next Door was the sense of creative control you had on the latter, and feeling like that was really your project in a way that The Animal never could be.
Yeah.
So as much as you feel comfortable sharing.
No, of course. Look, I'm like an open book. The Animal there was no lesson in filmmaking, really. I mean, there's just a lot more trailers, a lot bigger equipment, a lot more money, but it was really just making my Super 8 movies. But that was a game. I was really young. I was really, really young. And it was a lot of learning of the politics of studio filmmaking, which I was not prepared for at all, which was super challenging. So going into The Girl Next Door, which is a movie that I wrote for a year and a half, almost 2 years, much different experience where, I gotten so beaten up on The Animal that going into The Girl Next Door, I remember my producer, Chuck Gordon, who just recently passed away, who I just loved so much. He would say, boy, I don't know what they did to you on The Animal, but you just need to calm down, son. And no, because The Girl Next Door, I just wanted to make a movie that was mine. I wanted to make a movie that really was the script and all the songs that we had put in that script and the emotion and everything. And so I was very young, and I probably didn't appreciate enough that experience, because The Girl Next Door was such a wonderful experience because there was no compromises. Like for some magical reason, in the end, the studio really let me do what I wanted to do. But in the beginning, it was tricky, because in the beginning, they were hoping it was American Pie. You know, they kept asking me like, this is American Pie, right? And I was like, it's more like Something Wild, which was like this early Jonathan Demme film, and I don't think they'd ever knew what that film was. And then when they started seeing my cuts for Girl Next Door, and there's a scene, you know, the Girl Next Door gets a little edgy. You know, Timothy Oliphant beats the shit out of Emile Hirsch. And I remember the studio head kind of looking at me being like, you know, this is not American Pie. You know, Stifler doesn't get his ass kicked by some maniac. But no, but it all worked out. I mean, it was just a completely opposite experience. And I was young. I mean, I really thought, oh, wow, this is what it's like all the time. This is going to be easy. It's going to be amazing. And that wasn't really quite the case. Continuing my career for sure. But yeah, Girl Next Door was awesome.
I think one of the funniest anecdotes you had said earlier was of the kid who came up to you and said that Timothy Oliphant's character was a role model to him growing up. Would love to know where that kid is now.
No, it was crazy because I'm casting a movie right now, and the cast is all kind of early 20s, mid 20s actors and actresses. And they all are kind of saying like The Girl Next Door was this sentinel movie of their childhood. And one actor was like, yeah, I mean, Timothy Oliphant was kind of a role model for me. And I remember just being like, he was the porn producer in the movie. How is he a role model? And the kid was like, oh, he's just, you know, there's so much confidence and like, you know, the way he handled women. So I don't know. I mean, little, you know, I guess Timothy was a role model. I don't know. Maybe he was.
Now, Jason, did you and Luke know each other back at USC, or did that connection arrive kind of later?
We knew each other through friends. We were not in the exact same class.
Yeah.
I was in class with like Eric Kripke, Joe Nussbaum,
Trevor Sands,
Rick Famuyiwa, Trevor Sands, to name a few. That a very successful class I had. Very proud of our class. And Luke was there, and I knew him through friends, but I really got to know him because I was working at the studio Revolution / Sony when Luke was doing The Animal. So I was there doing Darkness Falls and Little Black Book. And so I really got to know him then. I watched his short and I told him how much I loved it. And that's sort of where we started talking about movies, about our love of like 70s movies like Hal Ashby, like Shampoo, and Jim Brooks, Cameron Crowe. And we really bonded over our mutual love of the same type of kind of grounded comedy with a heart that had something to say. So not to like jump to a couple years ago, but I mean
our tastes. I mean, Shuman's not like, our tastes are almost identical. It's crazy. It always has been. It's pretty wild.
Because not to get into the woods too much, but when we spent years developing role models, which Luke and I did together 10 years ago, Luke's initial vision of the movie was a different movie. We don't have to get into it, but it was a much more Cameron Crowe type movie than the sort of Judd Apatow-esque movie it became. Not that either is bad or wrong. I know we're very proud of role models. People love it. But that movie evolved too. A lot of our early discussions were like The Weatherman with Nicolas Cage. Remember, we were like, we want this movie to be like The Weatherman, which we both loved, which was this sort of like unfortunate, non-successful Nick Cage dramedy of something we both loved. But anyway, I knew Luke's sensibilities. I knew what he had inside of him. Obviously, he showed a lot of that flair in Girl Next Door. And then he's gone and done different. He did a romantic comedy, he did a broad comedy, and a high concept thing, and Let's Be Cops. But I knew what was in his heart and soul. And so, like when Eduardo and I, especially when we were writing the third act of this movie, you know, Luke, I was like, he can do this. Like, I know he can get the comedy. That's easy for Luke, but I know he has it deep inside of him to like bring this kind of pathos out. So that was it was our evolving relationship through the years that led to this collaboration.
And Eduardo, can you say a bit more about sort of your input within this vision and sort of how you came to this story as well?
Well, when talking about Half Brothers, it came to my head right around the time we were releasing Instructions Not Included, which is a movie that is mostly in Spanish with some English, and that movie resonated with people because it had some kind of tonal blend of a lot of comedy, but also very emotional parts of the movie as well. So um, it was a coincidence of just wanting to explore more of that mixture of comedy and drama, more of that. The inspiration for that movie, in turn, were the same thing. The Jim Brooks, Cameron Crowe movies that have a lot of comedy and a lot of pathos. Also, a lot of very sentimental Italian movies that are shamelessly displaying all that emotion. So it was a coincidence between that and just exploring a little bit of like immigration themes that of starting with myself, somebody who'd been in the U.S. For a couple of years. So I started thinking about that story and started kind of fleshing it out. And along the way, I started my writing partnership with Jason Shuman. And then I told him, like, I have this idea and the story, and this is more or less what the elements are. And then we started writing together, and we approached Luis Gerardo, the star of the movie, who's a huge box office star in Mexico. But not only that, he's also a very respected actor. I've seen him on stage, and does wonders also as a dramatic actor. So I was like, okay, this is somebody who's box office value, great comedic chops, great acting chops, and together we approached Focus Features, and in a rare feat of confidence, they decided to come on board and support this movie, like a star that is not known to the U.S. audience, with a big chunk of it in Spanish, with tonal shifts, etc. And for some reason, they believed in it and supported it, and here we are.
A miracle, right?
Luke,
Yeah, no superheroes, no IP, no nothing.
Capes.
So, yeah. But we have a goat. So maybe that helps.
You mentioned the Spanish scenes, Eduardo. I actually am curious. Luke, do you speak any Spanish? Like, could you follow those scenes while directing, or are you just kind of like assuming that it went well?
It's a great question. I mean, I had taken Spanish from 6th grade to like freshman year of college, so you would think I'd be super fluent. That's definitely not the case. And people like Luis and Pia Watson, who played his fiance, I mean, they speak at a machine gun pace. Yeah. And so, I knew the script inside and out, but it was a great exercise in directing through eyes and watching their faces. And I like to be very close to the actors. I'm never deep in Video Village, and kind of feeling the energy of these actors is what I really went on. I mean, they could have, I knew what they were saying, but they could have flubbed words for all I know. And it was really an exercise in just feeling their energy and between each other and watching their eyes. And it was pretty amazing how kind of dead on I was when went in the editing room, and when the takes are somewhat translated. It was just very interesting. I had never thought I was going to direct a movie ever in a different language, and it was awesome. It was awesome.
The other thing you mentioned, Eduardo, that struck me as well about the film is you talked about these tonal shifts that happen, and I did pick up on there's a lot of things that, like, it's the classic making comedy out of like pretty intense tragedies at various points. Like, it strikes me that this father would, even the concept of sending his sons on this goose chase is like borderline abusive, and that like he institutionalized one son, but then there's all these things with immigration that it sort of grapples with, and stereotype, prejudice. And so I would just sort of love from Jason and Eduardo, especially in sort of the writing process, how you went, you said you wrote it for Luis specifically, but also in terms of how you knew you were going to balance these different shifts that go on.
Well, the first part would be, I'm very conscious of, I think that I can just describe it as a more American sensibility to kind of stick to one thing and run with it. I think when you make even especially studio films outside the United States and outside the English language, you are more used to seeing that on TV and whatnot. And from Asian movies like Parasite that are very schizophrenic in tone, and they have big jokes and they have horror and this and that, and Italian movies, and you see Life is Beautiful, the Italian movie, which dealing with the Holocaust and like slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
So that was always from the start a very conscious decision, kind of because we got away with it and instructions not included. So my mind went like, how can we push that? I always see it as formal storytelling started with like tragedy and comedy and these two black and white binary things, and started getting more complex. So it was just maybe a way to keep pushing that and see how much you can get away, the way chefs get away these days with like mixing something savory with something sweet and kind of see what happens with it. It's a choice, and we're hoping that people respond to it. There's a full spectrum of emotions that you live in life. So we're trying to blur the line little by little. So that was one thing. And to the second part is, it especially relates to Luke, is the toughest part when you want to do those two things is comedy, because it's a very specific skill set that to write and to direct comedy, to have your own voice. Everybody has their own taste in comedy, but at least you need to know what your tone and your voice is. So I find it that if you come across a director and a star that have comedic chops, that know the rhythm, the pacing, and have a consistent tone of comedy, and that also know emotion, they also know how to convey that. That's what gave me confidence. I mean, we had the vision, but it's one thing to have that on the page. People read the script with the ebb and flow of the tone and responded to it. But then it was like, okay, we need to find somebody who can execute this crazy idea. And Jason and I went like, yeah, Luke Greenfield.
That was the goal, right, guys? I mean, my experience is kind of frowned upon in the industry when you, like, the worst thing you could say is the word dramedy. When you say dramedy, you'll see a studio exec go, don't ever say that again, And they usually tell me, especially, like, pick a lane. Is it a drama? Is it a comedy? Like, pick one. And that was the main reason. One of the main reasons about making this movie was, could we walk the line a lot and interweave people laughing to people crying, back to laughing. One of the moments I think that we really like the most is when Renato gets arrested and he's walking down the corridor with the guard, and he there's a joke. He's like, well, just deport me. Don't you people love doing that? And then literally within seconds, maybe it's like 4 seconds, we reveal ICE, and we reveal these families locked in a cage. And it was interesting in a theater to hear the laughter of his joke, and then all of a sudden, woof, just real tense silence, and people just kind of like watching, going, whoa, and then entering this moment of real harsh reality and authenticity of what the reality is. So it's a very interesting, I love movies that blend genres. I mean, I just love it. And they're most of my favorites. And so I think it's just very interesting. It's a great experience to sit in a theater and experience the audience moving these different emotions rather than just laughter, or just crying. It's that to switch them and give them a ride, I think, is like the reason why we make movies, right?
And yet at the same time too, Luke, I think with your style of it, what's really interesting is there's a sense of, I feel like even the real comedic scenes, you still direct with the same sort of sense of, seriousness isn't quite the right word, but it's, the shots are very precise and taken very seriously. And there's a sense of, like, you direct even a lot of the comedy scenes with a sense of like it's rooted in sort of a more traditional dramatic style in some way, which I think is part of that jumping between them. Is that's how part of that. And you know, you have your moments of the big moments that you allow for, but it was one thing that I've kind of noticed actually in a couple of your films in that way, is you really try to prolong sort of the serious moments and allow that aesthetic to carry over through your comedy as well.
Thank you so much. That's a huge compliment. You know, in prep on this movie, we had an incredible DP, Thomas Scott Stanton. And, you know, when I go into movies, I have kind of a visual design book that's like twice the length of the script. And Thomas and I kind of walked through the movie, literally shot for shot, you know, how things are going to be framed color-wise. There's a lot of visual things we did in this movie. And then to have Joe Matasic, our editor, this filmmaker genius, you know, really kind of play out these scenes and find the moments. It's very hard to find an editor who is wonderful with comedy and drama. Very rare. I mean, you know, there's some great comedic editors and great dramatic editors, but Joe, thank God we had Joe, who really understood the tone and again, editorially could find the right moments. And just like you're saying, is like, and play things very honest and real. And that was the whole goal, you know, for all of us, right? I mean, it was like, we all said, even with Luis, is like, we're going to, you know, if we're going to make an emotional movie that's poignant but funny, we got to be honest. We got to dig deep into our own fucked up families and histories and parents' divorces. And so, you know, that was something that our actors really kind of dove into head first. And so a lot of that credit goes to them.
I just wanted to point out that I see in the chat some people didn't get to watch the movie. So
oh no.
Let's try not to spoil some of the
I can act. Should I act it out right now? To at least act out the first.
Yeah. Let's do like the Shakespeare Bridge version.
There's a little plane. Kids flying it.
Bye, Papa. Yeah.
That's right.
But no, I just wanted, just in case you wanted to start talking about specific scenes in the third act, I'm like, let's not.
Oh, there's some good things we want to talk about in the end.
You know, I feel like that's
cover your ears.
Doing their homework, right? You know, I just want to throw out, so I don't want to go out too off script, but Joe Matasic and Thomas Stanton are both panelists right now. They're muted. I do want to create space for if either of you would like to interject in sort of elaborating on what Luke was talking about. Since we are in this a little bit more informal Zoom environment,
yeah,
I feel comfortable taking advantage of that space and letting you kind of share some thoughts if you want to. Don't feel pressure. I know you're not expected to, so if you don't want to, just do nothing.
I can tell you right now, Thomas is freaking out. He hates public speaking so much, so bring him in right now.
But Thomas, do nothing. It's totally fine. Just sit back and relax. We're not expecting that of you.
How do we?
What was that, Luke?
What?
Can we bring them on or no?
No, see, I don't want to pressure them. They weren't ready for it. So if they don't want to join, it's okay.
Maybe
I wanted to leave the option if they wanted to, though.
Cool.
I just want to point out that they did an amazing job. But when speaking about Thomas, I mean, we made this movie, and I know that for an indie movie, a lot of people love to have the budget, but this movie, it was always conceived to be bigger, and it ended up being bigger, but we had to make a lot of things work, and a lot of it had to do with Thomas's work, because we had everything. First of all, they did tell you in school not to do. We had like animals. We had a lot of scenes with like the kid. We had a period in piece in Mexico in the 90s. We had present day in the US. We had a lot of exteriors, road movie, scenes in English, scenes in Spanish. We had all the VFX of this airplane and the remote control airplane going through the. So it's madness. All these
it was
different
simple.
elements,
it was just a simple movie to make.
Yeah, exactly. like so I'm just saying my hats off for Thomas, who was able to create amazing shots, but also move quickly because I had the fortune of being also a producer in this movie that we co-wrote. So I was always hoping that we can stay on track, and between just the discipline that Luke has as a director, that how organized he is and how clear of a vision he had from the get-go, and with Thomas being able to work the way he did and solving problems with light and lightning and all this stuff. I'm like, we were really lucky to have that team.
I mean, there's so many filmmakers I'm sure on here right now, and it's like, just to even discuss it, right? It was, Eduardo was saying, it's like it was a decent budget for a tiny independent film, but we're still at a big studio. This is still tier 2 unions, everything. Going through the budget, you would see all this money go to accounting, and I'm like, no, like we need that money so bad. But it was not a tiny movie. That was the thing. We're doing a road film. We're supposed to be in 5 different states, Mexico, America, and we just shot the whole movie in Albuquerque, the entire movie, except for Thomas and I had to do a remote unit in San Miguel with Eduardo's great friend Rui in San Miguel to capture that opening sequence of the plane, and because we wanted that authenticity, and that was all directed through Skype. This movie was all these firsts. In pre-production, I had to sit in front of this computer and direct a crew in Mexico in real time, but I couldn't see. It wasn't. Thomas is probably on here laughing his ass off. We would look at it. You could hardly really tell because these are drone shots, so it's not in full 4K. And these shots would happen, and then I'd look at Thomas, and I'm like, "Do you think we got it?" And Thomas would be like, "I have no idea." And then we'd have to like play it back with the crew in Mexico and directing extras, and it was just simple. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's like it was the smoothest movie you could ever make. No, but but to all the filmmakers out there, it was 3 moves a day. Kudos to Thomas, who just like, I'm very I work at a very high intensity on set, and so Thomas, I have a lot of shots to do. I have a lot of interesting kind of framing and things like that. And Thomas has no time whatsoever. So, it could have been a absolute nightmare, but the greatest thing, and this was one of the best experiences I've had making a movie, was we had such great freaking people, the warmest, coolest people from the top down. Luis was incredible and brought such an energy. I know everyone says, "Oh, we were a family." It's like, yeah, whatever. But like, we were a family. It was crazy, and there were no egos. There was no battles. There was no what a lot of us are used to on certain movies. Like I said, the politics were gone. There were no politics in this movie. It was just going back to film school, being like, okay, we have 1 hour to do this. How are we going to do it? And things like that, which is the most fun. I'd rather deal with massive, complicated hurdles that seem impossible rather than dealing with massive egos and politics, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and that is something you hear a lot, especially on, I think it's so funny talking about this film as like an indie, when like there was such high production value and like so much going on in it. But I do see what you mean, though, in terms of, it's very different from some of the other large studio films. But especially when there is some sense of autonomy and sort of how you're assembling that crew, the unity of it is always referenced by filmmakers. That's just an important component of how things are, because especially if there is a limited budget, it's imperative that there's a smoothness in how things operate and that people understand their shorthand.
Yeah.
Now, I think all 3 of you were producers on this, correct?
Correct.
So all of you had a hand then in kind of how you assembled that crew and stuff. So I'd love to, I assume there were a lot of familiar people. Well, actually, quick though, Luke, remind me, why were you directing remotely for the Mexico scene? Like, why weren't you there in person?
This kudos to this man, Eduardo, right here. So, we had all these R&D meetings before we were greenlit at Focus, and the movie opens in San Miguel. It was so important to open the movie in a Mexico that was beautiful, in a Mexico that was warm and loving, and this beautiful relationship between this father and son, not Sicario, not Traffic, and those all have very, red, muted kind of feel. We wanted Elysian, right? And so in these meetings, they would say, okay, so let's find San Miguel and Albuquerque. And Eduardo would be like, it's not going to happen. And they're like, well, you don't have the budget, blah, blah, blah. And making a movie to studio, shooting in Mexico, it's a funny story, shooting in Mexico, they think it's very expensive because of the security and all the things you have. Albuquerque was the most dangerous fucking place I've ever been to in the world. I've been to many third world countries. But anyway, so they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us shoot. I remember they looked me in the eye and they said, "You are not going to Mexico, period. End of story." Because there was talk. Remember, Shuman was like, "Luke, I'm going to pay for you to go on a red eye. We're going to fly you out there. They won't even fucking know." And I remember that plan?
The studio kind of knew that we were in it to win it with this movie. And so they kind of called and threatened Eduardo and I, like, if we hear that you guys went to Mexico, even on an R&D mission, even just to see the sights, we will shut you guys down. And we were like, all right.
But that was real. That was, I remember Shuman's like, Luke's going to take a vacation. You can't stop him.
Yeah, you can't
take a vacation.
Look, I'm sure everyone on this call listening, like, Luke and I are Trojans, and we know what it's like to be ready to go make your movie. And I'm sure many of you write it too. There's Joe. There's Joe.
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Matasik, our editor.
So, what you do is when Eduardo and I are writing the script, we're writing scenes and we're like, this is our Spielberg shot. And this is our Kubrick shot. And this scene is going to be this like moment. And we're comparing it to Italian cinema. And that's the fun of being creative, writing the movie, envisioning this movie, like, oh, fine, $40 million, be fine. Like, you got to do it right. And then what you'll experience, unless you're Chris Nolan or making a movie with a DC or Marvel brand in front of it, is that, you start always with this grandiose vision. And then eventually you get told, like, well, you can keep your vision, but here's the box you got to put it in. This is how much money you got. And that's where really, I think a lot of it, separates the kids from the adults, because you have to, how can we still give the moviegoer, how can we still tell our story with all the comedy, the emotion, the sights, the everything, but just do it within the box that we're being given. And that's always the challenge. On 99% of the movies, TV shows, you have to maintain your initial vision the best you can. And that's where the three of us, and four of us, Jason Benoit was part of our foursome, the producer. And like, we just went to Albuquerque and we were like, we're just going to do it by hook or by crook. And that's where having a great crew, having partners with you that you're just like, well, we can figure this out. We can figure. My favorite thing, being a film geek, is DVD extras. Back when I would watch them, that was always the best, when the director would say, we had no time for this scene, so I had to improvise on the spot. And you're like, that's one of the classic scenes from the movies, and they improvised it with an hour left in the day. Yep. And so I think that's what, you're never just going to get it exactly the way you wanted, with as much time as you wanted, with as much money as you wanted. You got to figure it out. And I feel like that was what was so proud to show this movie and say, I feel like with all the things that were stacked against us, we were still able to put the vision up on the screen the way we wanted to. And so, like, I think we're all proud of that. But
yeah, I mean, to add on to that, Shuman, and Shuman articulated that so beautifully. In these research and development meetings with the studio before we were greenlit, I mean, the head of production would look at us and say, we're not even sure this is possible. I believe, am I wrong? We were the smallest budget movie that Focus has ever financed, right?
Yeah.
And so they were looking at us like, we're not even sure this is possible. And I remember when they were talking about shooting days, they named a number in the beginning, and I remember that first meeting, the head of production looked at me. He's like, "So do you feel confident that you can shoot this movie in that number of days?" And I was like, "Not at all. No, I know I can't." And his face would be like, "Well, what do you mean you can't?" And so, it's that, it's that thing that we always talk about at SC is don't take no, ever. Just don't take it. And so, you keep pushing and pushing and pushing for what you need, because, at the end of the day, you can't jump from theater to theater, stand in front of an audience and go, "Listen, we just didn't have enough time. And I wasn't, I didn't have the guts to stand up to the studio." Like, no one cares. Like, you just have to get it done no matter what. Right. And you gotta be willing to die for it.
That was the first thing. Unfortunately, the students now don't know Professor Shepard. I don't know if you had him, Luke.
Yeah, I did, of course.
Oh, my first week in film school, first class, I remember Professor Shepard saying, "Let me just say up front that art is a two-way medium. Those who create it and those who watch it. And you have your intentions and they have their perceptions, and neither are wrong."
Yeah.
So you could have all the greatest, but this is what I wanted to do. This is what I meant to do.
Right.
And then they could be like, "But that's not what I got from it. So sorry." And so
Right.
you have to understand that relationship, and you have to just be like, I'm not going to be at every screening to explain actually when you envision it, you have to sort of you got to put it all on screen and let it speak for itself.
Except for the director's commentary, when that used to be a thing. When that used to be a thing. If you go back to my Girl Next Door commentary, I will go on and on and on about how there was a U2 song here. We couldn't afford it. I'll sing it to you if you don't know the song. If Bono's listening right now, will you change your mind and maybe you'll give it to us? But yeah, I agree. There's no excuses in the end. Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on that, because in the explanation that we're, at least that I'm giving, it was not necessarily that I'm throwing shade specifically or at focus or anything, because you understand that the studio, if you don't, like I said, if you don't have the IP, if you don't have the movie stars, etc., it's great that they greenlight the movie, but they're gonna go also you have to be realistic, as because we always you mention things like, well, James Bond went to shoot in Mexico. Why can't we? Well, they have James Bond.
Right. Right.
But by the same token, is that in the same way that it's their job to look after the things they have to look after, and that's their purview. And in our case, and specifically my case, I had to make sure that we were faithful to the DNA of the movie, and part of the reason why it exists in the first place was to show a different side of Mexico, to put on the screen voices that are not represented, and the theme of the movie, the theme of empathy, it's predicated on the ability to see things from a different perspective. So the beginning of the movie had to show that perspective, this is the mind of the character, this is the idyllic place that he left behind, and if you don't get in that mind frame, you don't understand why he feels the way he feels, why his father feels the way he feels about his home, etc. So it was just essential, and we made it work.
I do agree that shot is of all so. The goat's great. I'm sure it took a lot of effort though to get the handler on board for that. And it was a wonderful addition, but the shot especially, that was one of those, I know that took a lot of effort to get, and I do think it is absolutely pivotal to it, in that one moment of starting off exactly as you described it, Eduardo, of it's the love letter shot to Mexico that is so important of establishing that character's perspective that sort of carries through. Yeah. Jason, there was something you said I kind of want to come back to, actually, because I'm still thinking about it a bit. I love what the professor had said, though, of how the audience and the filmmaker, whether director or writer, whoever, that they have their own take and neither's wrong. And I think especially just because you each have your own background now of films you've done and chances to see people's reactions, I'm curious of what the thing is that the message you have tried to tell at some point that has been most frequently misunderstood, or something that like anything along, you know what, however you want to handle that question. I want to leave it kind of ambiguous.
I mean, my first notion is like, I've been lucky enough to have made a couple dozen movies as a producer. This is my first one as a writer, so it's very special. But, you know, I'm such a film fan and lover and geek. And since as long as early as I can remember, my dream was to go to USC Film School. When I got in, like, I really, if my parents were on this panel, they'd be like, he was so conceited. He thought like the heavens had parted and like the sun had shined on, like, I am been anointed. And then you go to orientation, you know, a couple of weeks before freshman year, and you realize so did everyone else who got in. Thought the same thing. And you're like, all right, it's time to get to work. It's time to hit the ground running and do the work to hone your voice and learn and make movies. And so every movie that I've been given the opportunity to make, I would roll up my sleeves and I would try to make the best. Like when I would made a sequel to Daddy Daycare, which is probably like my biggest black mark on my thing. I spent 9 months like in Salt Lake City, watching every camp movie, watching every childhood thing, trying to remember those early movies that I watched. I was trying to make the best friggin' camp movie that 10-year-olds would love and watch over and over again. It's not like we endeavor to make something that the critics don't like or that the audiences don't like. We're pouring our hearts into this thing, and then unfortunately, or sometimes fortunately, you unleash them, and like Daddy Day Camp gets 6% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm just like, man, I was just trying to make a killer camp movie that the kids would just worship. But little did I know, like there was Cuba Gooding's father had a military background, and all the critics were like thinking there was some military message in the movie, and and I'm like, I didn't have any of that intention when I don't know what I was talking about. I was just trying to make camp jokes and have fun. And then I've had it on the flip side, you know, with Lone Survivor or something where everything just came together beautifully and it was just a joy, and the critics liked it and the people liked it. But I can't say I worked any harder or less harder. I give them all. I mean, my mom would hate to hear this, but you know, I don't have any children. And when I say these are all your grandchildren, Mom, nah. But I put my life, blood, sweat, tears into these things, and then you just unleash them to the world and hope that that people, especially the audience, likes them, and that maybe with a smaller section of the audience that watched it and loved it, maybe it becomes a part of their life the way movies did for me in my era growing up, that really impacted me either as a filmmaker or just sometimes as a human being. Just sometimes a movie impacted me where it made me want to go after the girl or be a better person, or, you know, confront issues with my parents. It didn't always have to just inspire me to be a filmmaker. It just could inspire me to be a better human being. And so as grandiose as that sounds, that's like the truth. We just go into these and we put it all out on the table and then hope for the best.
Well said. Well said.
Well, as I suspected would happen, we've been talking for 15 minutes already, and I haven't asked a single audience question. So
okay.
I got to read this one from a panelist, Mr. Luke Greenfield. I'm a big fan of Girl Next Door, and I want to know if there was ever considered a sequel.
Trace Labatkin. Yes, to be honest with you, my God, for years and years and years, it's mostly TV. Can you make it into a TV series? Can you make it into a series? You never know.
Real quick, Luke, I actually want to invite Trace to join our little panel here for this question.
Okay.
So keep answering, and then I'll let Trace sort of clarify anything else you wanted to add to the question.
Okay.
But,
no, I don't know. You know, we never making that movie. We never never considered a sequel. But even to Jason's point about Rotten Tomatoes, you know, it's like The Girl Next Door was the first movie that I was so proud of, you know, and so excited. And I would go, Matt Siegel and I would go across the country and to these word of mouth screenings and watch the movie with the audiences. And I'm not one of those filmmakers that sits in the back of the theater with a baseball cap on low and high. It's like I sit dead middle and I love to experience what they're experiencing. And Girl Next Door was so incredible. And then when the movie came out, it just got crushed on Rotten Tomatoes. I remember that, that Roger Ebert, I was so young. I was trying to find out where he lived. So I was going to go to his house, but he went out of his way to say how horrible Girl Next Door was, how ruthless it was, what an evil film. And it was a good learning experience at like 30 years old of like, who cares? Who cares about these reviews? Because I was in these theaters all over America, and it was like, and even to this day, Girl Next Door seems to have really hit a great chord. And so I was going back to the Rotten Tomatoes thing, as Shuman said. It's like, at the end of the day, it's funny when I pick out movies, I like to watch, I get excited when they're 50, 60%. I tend not to like the movies that are 98%. I really don't. I mean, some of my favorite films, you go back and you look at some of the best films, like they're 60%, 50%. So hello, Trey Slovakian.
Hi, Mr. Greenfield. Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I'm a huge fan of Girl Next Door, and I date a lot of girls in their late 20s and early 30s, and they all say it's one of their favorite films. So I'm sure they'd all love to see a sequel. So I would hope that you would maybe pursue a sequel to it. I think we'd all love to see it.
You never know. Well, thank you. You never know.
You're welcome. I'm a big fan.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Grace. I do agree. I think Alicia Cuthbert's also an underrated performer too. I don't know if you saw, was it Happy Endings? Was that the?
Sure.
Oh, the show.
Sure.
Yeah, great show.
Great show.
He's great.
So in terms of my movie back to attendees, who else do we have here? Let's see. We answered this one, and then
Here's a question about music.
yeah.
Erica Heinisch. Hello, Erica.
Let's bring Erica over.
Oh yeah, can you discuss the music? Did you work with the music supervisor who composed the music? That's a great question.
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, music's everything to me to begin with. I mean, it like, when I write and when I visualize movies, it's all to songs and music, and I try my best to get those songs in the movie, and I play those songs on set. This movie was super challenging as far as score, and Jordan Siegel, this young up and coming amazing composer, this is his first movie ever, and he had we put him in a box that was incredibly challenging, because Joe Matasic here, our incredible editor, temped the movie with Thomas Newman. And if people are unfamiliar with Thomas Newman, I would say second to John Williams, he's probably one of the greatest composers we've ever had. And so Joe was tempting it to Road to Perdition, and one of my favorite scores, Meet Joe Black. And so, Thomas Newman is Jordan Siegel's hero. So to put the challenge on Jordan of like, okay, beat this. I mean, like when Luis opens that barn door, my God, if that score is not hitting, if in the end, in that DVD sequence when Flavio and Juan Pablo Espinosa is pouring his heart out, and you see little Asher with the makeup on, and those kind of moments. Hello, Erica. It's all the music. We all know that. We're all filmmakers here, right? It's the music. And so, he just rose to the occasion. I mean, I don't know, is he 30 years old yet? 31 maybe? And so this was just a huge opportunity that he just crushed. As far as songs, Erica, we worked very closely with Universal Music Group, who, obviously are one of the best. They were our music supervisor. On a movie this small, that, there is no supervisor. And again, thank God, Joe Matasic, who is again an incredible editor who uses songs so well, has an incredible taste in songs, and he cut his teeth on a lot of television, so he comes from that world. But on this movie, it was a lot of just trying songs out like crazy, because normally you have a supervisor who comes in early and understands the mood I want, and I give him songs or her songs, and then as soon as we go to the editor's cut, there's just a library of songs that are in the different choices for different parts. We didn't really quite have that luxury here, so it was very challenging. But I mean, one day my director's cut will come out, and you'll see all the songs that were originally in the movie. But it worked out. It worked out really well. Again, hats off to Jordan Siegel, who had we gave him the biggest challenge in the world. I mean, we might as well have tempted with all John Williams music and just said, "Hey, dude, do this," So I don't know if he's even on here, but Jordan, if you can hear me, I don't know. I'm looking at the list here.
For those writers, I'm sure pretty much all of you are, like, the road trip genre it's very deceiving, because it seems like maybe it's a fun one to write because you're always moving forward. Your characters are always in motion, actually physically in motion. But Eduardo and we got deep. I mean, we watched so many road trip movies, and we learned, and music, obviously, you got to have a good score and good soundtrack to help the audience with the pacing and the tonal changes. But also, I mean, every stop matters. You cannot have any frivolous stops. You can't, the road trip has to be something, as a writer, that you're structuring out in a way that each stop has a thematic, character, and plot importance. And so the music and the stops really play a huge part in, especially if you watch any of your Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and your Little Miss Sunshines, and Philomena, a lot of the movies that we were like, oh man, these are ones that did it well. Those are some subtle or not so subtle things that they did beautifully that make them movies you can watch over and over again.
Great. Thanks, guys, for answering my question.
Thanks, Erica. There's a question for Joe here, I see.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring it up real quick while I bring up Ryan Armstrong, who I had next. Jason and Eduardo, was there a favorite of the road trip films? Did you have a number one where you're like, yeah, this is definitely the best road trip film?
We watched so many, honestly, but for me, top three must have been Philomena, Central Station, and the Arrival director.
The Denis Villeneuve movie, which I can't remember the
Yeah.
title, which blew our minds away. Yeah, I would just add
Incendies.
probably Midnight Run, because Luke and I are obsessed with that movie.
Obsessed.
And that was, obviously ours is a different kind of movie, but boy, that does it at an A+ level.
Yeah, I'm not saying any of these movies are
Right,
connected to that, but I'm just saying, watching them, we're like, wow, these are great for different reasons, different tones, but probably the ones who, even though I had seen them maybe a couple of them years ago, but watching them through the prism of like, okay, I'm gonna try to create the most interesting, moving, and visual journey, and I'm like, okay, these guys nail it. Like the bar is pretty high.
Not before Ryan asked this question, someone asked the question, were you able to test the film with an audience? And if so, what did we learn? I love that. Only in Los Angeles would a student ask that, but I bring it up only because we were very lucky that we were able to test the movie weeks before all the COVID stuff hit. So we were able to see the movie with a packed audience and hundreds of people in Burbank. And I won't get into details because it'll bore, but it played huge. And we learned that we had an audience-pleasing movie. And that was a big win for us, the filmmakers, for the studio, to know that they had a movie that played emotionally, comedically from an audience level. So And that was a thrilling night for all of us.
Yeah, it was.
We learned that it's something that came up, when they give you all these cards that we were not expecting, but we were not sure about how people were going to receive this character who's just so critical of the United States, and people loved it. Everybody, white people, Latinx people, older, younger, they were like, I'd never seen that in a movie, and I love that like he has that specific point of view. So that was surprising. We're not expecting that to resonate so much, but
You picked a good time to be critical of the United States. It was definitely like a peak moment for that.
It was Rain Man. We watched a lot of Rain Man, especially
I forgot about Rain Man. Yeah.
Especially Luis and I. And Luis got so tired of me pushing that on him. I'd fucking quiz him. I'm like, what happens in the end? Because he said, yeah, I saw it years ago. I'm like, see it again. But that was a very interesting film for this movie as far as inspiration, and even Renato's character. Because I think Tom Cruise is so incredible in that movie. And so I just kept pushing that on Luis over and over. He was so sick of me hearing, I don't care how Tom Cruise did it. I'm going to do it my own way. I'm like, all right.
All right, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan, poor Ryan.
Yeah.
He's like,
Thank you,
that's not my
guys.
question.
What an honor to be here. My question was prompted by something Luke said earlier about how difficult it is to edit across genres, and complimented Joe on the ability to do both drama and comedy. And I was wondering, Joe, if you could just talk a little bit about what your secret sauce is.
Yeah, I don't know if there's so much a secret sauce to it as it was all very carefully laid out in the script. Like when we're going to be threading from one, the comedy to the drama. I have more of a background in drama, and I haven't really done anything that's like a straight comedy up to this point. I mean, most stuff I find these days that's dramatic has comedic elements to it. So, especially in TV where I was doing a lot of my, where the bulk of my career has been just motoring through these episodes and you've got, they're trying to hit a lot of notes on some of these shows, emotional notes. So you kind of play around with it. You're also, you're not really sitting in a room with the director or producer for very long on these episodes. You're kind of left to your own. So you're really just trying to get things, you find that the things that work for you, what humors you, the drama for me just tends to be a little bit more, an easier thing to find. I think it's a little more straightforward. Eduardo mentioned earlier the comedy being so subjective. There's stuff that movies that people love that I just can't stand, and movies that people hate that I love. And so it's really hard to really kind of nail down. I mean, I think you just kind of have to trust like what's funny to you. But also, in this case, it was also a little unconventional because I came a little later in the process. So I didn't have a lot of time to really live with the script, live with, and really get to know Luke and Jason, all these guys, and what their sensibilities were. And so a lot of it was just figuring that out on the job, and really like, in this case, it's like trusting the process and looking to the director. I mean, Luke's got a record, he's done a bunch of movies, funny movies. I mean, obviously comedies and whatnot, but I was like, this guy knows what he's doing. I've seen his movies. So just trust that and just try to find try to find his sensibility. Because ultimately it's like you're serving, if he's the sort of author of the film at that point, as the director, then I think you're really just taking your cues from him. And then once you kind of get in that lane and you figure out, it's like, okay, I get it. It's like, this is maybe a little bit too broad. Maybe this is a little bit too, it's just not quite in the lane. And you kind of figure out what the movie wants to be and what the director wants, what his vision is. Then you already know. Then as things come along, you can say, okay, well, I might have an idea for something, and you pitch it. And you already kind of know if you're going to pitch it, then it's probably something that's going to be considered. So yeah, I mean, that was really the big thing. It was just really like trying to figure out what Luke and these guys all had in mind. And once I got there, then it was like, okay, I think we're good. So
Joe's being very humble, so I have to jump in here. Okay. So truth be told, the first two editors did not work out on this movie. We're all directors here. We all know that when you come and watch the editor's cut, you go home, you cry, my life is over. This was a very unique experience where I really thought we were like dead. I was going to flee the country and go, go be a cobbler in Europe. And Joe came in very late in the game, and Joe, shall I go into this? So we didn't know Joe, and Joe came highly recommended. He came into the editing room. Jason Benoit and I were there, my co-producer, my producing partner. Hello, Jason Benoit. And we looked at him, we said, listen, like, you got to come in here and redo the whole movie. And, on editor room walls, you have every scene listed on the wall, right? And Joe came in and said, listen, let me cut a scene. You guys don't know me. I'm going to cut your hospital scene right now. Leave the room. Give me about an hour. It was amazing. Like, give me about an hour, come back and check out the scene. And what Joe did was he edited that first hospital scene where Flavio's on his deathbed, telling his sons about the road trip. And I had been crying all day of like, my career's over. And we came in and this scene was incredible. I mean, it was incredible. And he did it in an hour. And then it was to convince the studio to bring Joe on. But so to Joe's credit, Joe had no time, guys, none. I mean, normally an editor is there from pre-production and they start cutting dailies and then they're just going along with camera. Joe didn't have that luxury. Joe had a very broken editor's cut that was almost unwatchable. It was an assembly. And it was all on Joe to fix it. And Joe was in there day and night. God bless his family for letting him, sleep in the editing room 7 days a week. I mean, we almost, I remember a time where Joe turned around and said, am I like spending Christmas here? Like, should I get a tree in the corner and just bring the kids in and just kind of do Christmas here? And, he kind of wasn't kidding. And Joe,
that was before COVID, by the way. Sorry to kind of like.
But I'll just say it, a long-winded thing. Joe had little to no time. This was his first studio film. Thank God Joe is a filmmaker as much as he is an editor. And, I've never seen it in all my career. I've never seen an editor come in with so much time pressure, no resources, no money. And the deadlines were not moving. And so, Joe just was the hero. He was the fantastic Matasic.
Well, it was a big opportunity too. So, I mean, there was no way I wasn't going to, be putting in the time. And it's also just, that's the job. I mean, I've endured plenty of these long rear schedules and whatnot, but it's like the entire movie is finished. And it's like Luke said, that wall, and you see like the little cards of every scene, and it's daunting because, it's like you don't have the time to live with the movie and get the dailies to come in and say, let's go take a walk. And, I'm going to cut that scene tomorrow. It's kind of, I don't have it in me today, and it's just like, just going. And which must have been really challenging for Luke and Benoit, being literally 2 doors down from me and coming in every hour or so, be like, can we see something? Can we see? I mean, they got to know what's the status of it, And I'm like showing them scenes. I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't normally show anybody these scenes. They're not there yet, but it's like, it was almost just like, you just gotta kind of burn through this stuff as quickly as possible just to get it to a place that we could start working on it. It was like just getting assembly. It was like, are we in the right direction? Great, move on, and just try not to stare at that board too much. But Ryan, it's interesting going back to your initial question, because when I watched the first cut of the movie, the comedy, there's it was uneven, let's put it that way. And so I was having a hard time really nailing down like what the comic sensibility of the movie was. So when I watched it and I saw that initial hospital scene, I was like, okay, that's the act one turn. It's the initial cut blew through all these emotional beats. I'm like, okay, well, that's a place to start. And I thought a little bit of strategy in there was start with the drama scene you can crush, like go for that. And there's a little bit of comedic stuff when Asher comes in and it turns. But I was like, go with the thing that was the one I was certain of. Like I was like, I know I can nail that scene. And so that was a choice in that. I think if I would have done one of the scenes following that, like the first driving scene, that was a more challenging thing because of technical issues and whatnot, and just tons of footage, and the actors are trying different stuff, and it was like a much harder scene to really figure out. I wouldn't have got the job. So, you know.
Ryan, again, he's being humble. The hospital scene was a very very hard scene to cut. And he temp scored it with Thomas Newman during that little break that me and Benoit like went and got lunch. So, yeah.
Joe, do you feel it's easier to go in and recut these movies that have already been done, or is the fact that you have to sort of reconceptualize existing work, does that actually make it just as difficult coming in?
It's you know, I've had to step in a few times in other cases, or there was one pilot that I took over because another stepped away for a feature, and but it was in great shape, so I was really just taking something at a great foundation and I was just building off of that. So this was a different situation because you know, it just was like most of the scenes just couldn't work off the edit. Like, and it's also like you got to get to know the dailies and all that stuff. But had it been in better shape, I probably would have just taken it and moved forward. But in this case, we really just kind of had to start over. And I found that it actually, sometimes it really tripped me up because I would see a scene that wasn't working and then look back, I hate it. And so I'd say, okay, you know, and it's like trying to say, well, and I'd look at it and say, well, that's I kind of like that little part of it, and that part seems to work. So it was really trying to not overthink stuff and say, okay, if he hates that, swing the opposite direction and go to, you know, a completely different way, which I'm sure I did plenty of times, just trying to figure out like, okay, if he hates that, then like, so, you know, it's a different process than just starting with the footage yourself and making decisions, because you justify all the decisions and there's a reason you did all these things. So someone comes in and says, okay, why'd you do it this way? And you're like, well, for these reasons, you know, makes perfect sense, you know.
I remember those nights, by the way, where I would be at the door of the editing room and I'd say, Joe, I always loved you, man. If you never see me again, I just want to let you know you've done great work here. I don't know if I'm ever coming back, but yeah.
So yeah, I just try to not get tripped up over. I mean, sometimes it's like, you know, you're seeing a version of a scene and it's like you can't, you know, it starts to tangle up your vision of what you might want it to be. And so that just was a process I kind of figured out over time on how to deal with it. And to be fair, there were times when we'd go back and then, you know, I'd have a version of the scene and then Luke would say, well, let's go back and look at the editor's cut. And, you know, there'd be something from the previous editor's cut. He's like, no, that actually worked kind of, you know, fairly well there. And so pull that out and use it. So, you know, it was a little tricky.
You know, Luke, I imagine too. Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. Were you about to talk? Or do you?
I was, because this is kind of for Joe. I was just saw this comment from Randall that says, just a comment, the scene with Asher jumping on the bed with the goat while Renato's having a serious conversation was hilarious. Thanks.
There are no edits in that scene.
Oh, shit.
What I was going with too is that you forgot to mention that then on top of all the pressure and all the difficulties that you're mentioning, then we had to work remotely, and we were at the time the first studio movie to do this part of the post-production. Yeah, to do when COVID hit and everyone at home in different places with their own drives and working over Zoom. So I guess it just added to the fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. So much fun.
Eduardo, I'm so glad you said that. I think I had in my head that this production started before COVID hit. And clearly it did not.
No.
So I'd love to talk about some of the, Ryan, I appreciate your question. Thank you for being here as our
Thank you so much.
For the
Appreciate
last 20 minutes. Appreciate you, man. Yeah, can you briefly just kind of can we unpack sort of that production process a little bit and kind of how you navigate it? Because that was important to all of you.
We did shoot the movie before COVID, and we did get to edit up to a point that we got to screen it and test screen it. But right after the test screening, uh, 4 days later, then we're like, well, you can't come back to the like once you're like, okay, because you know when you're showing this movie at a test screening, it's like, well, it's temp this and temp that, and some things are, you know, placeholder, but it's the rough shape or overall shape of the movie. But you still have work to do. Not to mention you still have the whole rest of post production and music and VFX and all that stuff to do with Joe. So before you really lock it, so it was right after that. We were celebrating. We did great, and it was a great thing for focus and as well. So, and then, boom! Like you can't go back to.
It was all happening. It was all happening in real time in the editing room. Our editing room was on Hollywood Boulevard here, and Joe was from Seattle would hear. Remember, Seattle got hit first, and so Joe would be hearing all these things. And it's like, you know, the rumors are coming down of like, we're gonna have to leave. We're gonna have to leave. I remember I'm like, they're gonna have to kill us. We're not leaving ever.
Meanwhile, I was like going to the assistant editor, Aaron Garcia, and I was like, dude, we better prep some drives because I think this thing's coming. He's like, okay. So we're kind of getting ready on the side just in case.
Yeah. It was crazy.
Luke, I don't know who this person is, but the Zoe Brown says you were instrumental in leading.
Here, I'm gonna bring Zoe up because she's
cool.
been waiting for a while to ask her question.
Okay.
I'll give her shout out so Luke can start. Says you were instrumental in leading me to getting my first post-grad job, all from a cold message I sent. Zoe, explain.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
I got it. Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, Luke and I are from the same town.
Westport, Connecticut.
Yeah. And he helped me by introducing me to his old assistant, and now I'm working for him, kind of.
Woo!
Yeah, so it's awesome. But off of that, I have a question for the writers actually, because I've talked to Luke and asked him a bunch of questions before. But I'm curious as to like when you were starting out and, you know, just graduating from USC and all that, how did you kind of get over like the hard part about like the beginning of writing and, you know, like rejection and like writer's block and all that?
I'll let Eduardo get into the mud of this question because he was his journey was so fascinating to me because his parents didn't support him coming into the film business.
Yep.
He's from Monterrey, Mexico, which his 4 sisters are all doctors, engineers, scientists. And here he is like, I'm going to go to Mexico City and become a comedy writer. And they were like, well, we're not giving you a penny. And so he had to write to eat. And I think that is a lot of his drive and his work ethic is like, there's no plan B, you know? And I think that he went to Mexico City and was like, I got to prove my worth. And I think that's a lot of it right there is how much do you want it? Because we all have self-doubt. We all get rejected. I mean, as much as Eduardo and I have been working together for 6 years, to me, it is a dream partnership. I love the man and we have a good, and right now we're trying to reinvent Short Circuit and bring Johnny Five to a new era. But I'll write a scene and call him up and be like, I'm terrible. I'm sending you the scene and it's awful and I suck. And I'm going to go like have dinner because I can't, like, I don't think it ever leaves. I just think you have to find that fire in you that's like, I have something to say. I have stories I want to tell. I have a point of view, whether it's comedy, drama, whatever genre you want or combination of, and you just got to get through it. But I want Eduardo to kind of dig in because he really, like his journey from being Monterrey, Mexico, all the way now to Hollywood, to me, it's like one of persistence and hard work.
I mean, it sounds so fascinating when you're talking about it. I'm like, keep going. What happened to this guy? Who is this person? But to you, I mean, I understand. I had like two versions of that journey. One, moving from Monterrey, as he said, to Mexico City. It was the hub. It's the hub of entertainment for a big part of the Spanish-speaking world, Latin America, and the Spanish-speaking world in the U.S. So I had to have my own journey there. It was a competitive environment for that market, and then I had the opportunity to right out of college to start working for Eugenio Derbez, who was the Jerry Seinfeld of the time and still is the biggest star. But and then after that early success and coming to the US and trying to really focus more on movies, which is what I wanted to do since I was 13. And a couple of things that were essential where one, there's no safety net. I think it's sink or swim, because I think the minute that you have a safety net of it almost I don't want to tell my parents this, but it almost helped they were not supportive because I had nothing else to fall back on. I had an opportunity to write comedy, so it was for me to have developed the discipline of waking up every day and having to write a monologue, having to write jokes to pay the bills. Doesn't matter if you're depressed or you just broke up with someone, you just like have to develop that discipline. So because you're like, if I don't do this, I'm not gonna eat. If I don't do this, I'm gonna lose my apartment, my whatever that. So one part was that. The other thing that happened later in my career when I moved to LA was what I learned was very helpful through those peaks and valleys, right? Is developing a community, finding a network of people, and together making a commitment of sorts of supporting each other, and because they will help you and they will be there for you when there is some kind of wrong turn in your career, when something, but they're also going to help you get a little bit of a perspective of when you're really failing or you're really succeeding, of you're not just getting too invested in the pain or the suffering. I think having a good network of people who are driven, I think is very helpful to make those peaks and valleys are come with the territory. You're never too big to fail in this career. You're never, it doesn't matter really who you are, you're gonna have some kind of massive failure in your career. So I think it's just developing the right network of people around you. And I would say just set goals that you feel like you maybe you're setting a goal that feels like 6 years down the line and it feels like too hard to attain, then you may want to add some like shorter term goals to that and start building up on that. So because you do, I think we do feed off of that sense of accomplishment, and I think you need to feel that in order to keep going. And it's part of the reason why actually Jason and I started a screenwriting competition a couple of years that we couldn't continue, sadly. But part of the reason was like, I think that not only we started the competition, we make sure that we split up the prices into smaller pieces, not for enough talented people to have access to them, but also for those prices to be beyond, like, okay, you get a pat on the back, or you get like a certificate, more like, okay, we're going to introduce you to an agent, or something that really felt like an accomplishment. Because having been there, I know that those small victories and those accomplishments that might seem small at a time, but they mean a lot and fuel you, give you a lot of fuel as a creator. So that's what I can tell
A
you.
USC guy won, by the way.
That's true.
Stanley Kalu, if any of you know him, he won the contest, and we made his movie, and it's coming out in February. So
very talented guy.
That's huge.
Yeah.
But and the reason why I mentioned community, I wanted to say, because to Jason's point, when I came to LA, I didn't know anybody. I had no friends in LA. I no connections, and eventually along the way, I realized that it was a little bit my instinct of trying to find other Latinx people in a community, and this was 10 years ago, before any idea of like inclusion, diversity, and everything that you're seeing right now. It was like meeting other Latinx writers, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm gonna have to change my name on the cover of the script because they have a Latinx Hispanic last name. They're not gonna read it," and things like that. So I think that finding strength in numbers was very important for me. And it is made to this day, by the way. I am part of a gay Latino writer group called the Clubhouse, and that's been a big support group for me. That when I go through this, whiplash of what feels like you're at the top, top of the world, and then you're like in hell in this industry. I think having that support group of people who are going through the same thing, but also have the drive to get out of those potholes, has been essential to my survival.
Thank you, guys.
Great question.
Thanks for the question, Zoe. So we have one last audience question here from Alex. This is just about if the film was played in Mexico yet, and if so, he's wondering if the English parts were dubbed or subtitled.
Luke, do you know? Well, to answer the question, it comes out in Mexico the 30th, right? December 30th.
December 30th. And then, yes, it will be subtitled. Well, it will be subtitled here. In Mexico, there will be two versions. One, normally in Mexico, we watch movies with subtitles. But certain studios feel like the reason why comedies don't play that well internationally has to do with the fact that people have to read subtitles. So they've been starting to dub comedies, starting with some of Eugenio's movies, etc. And they've done very well. So I think Universal is going to try to do both. Subtitle, the way subtitle with Spanish subtitles with the original English audio, and then there's a version dubbed in Spanish.
Sorry, I've been distracted by my little mom who keeps texting me saying that she's put a question in, but she can't get in. Mom, what'd I tell you? What'd I tell you about joining this Q&A?
I actually was about to read that question. The question is, hey, Luke, I hear you have an amazing mom. When you were little, she was your script consultant, driver, food service, financial backer, sound effects department, etc. Why don't you tell us about that? Love you, Mom.
Yeah, Luke, please tell us about that.
Oh, man. My little mom's everything. Shout out to my mom, guys, who's watching. Very excited about the movie.
She came to set. She was wonderful.
She came to set. I mean, what Zoe was asking about raw beginnings and stuff. Look, we were from Connecticut. We didn't know anyone. My mom was so worried about me becoming a filmmaker or wanting to be a filmmaker, because it just seemed like not a real career. And, it's funny what Eduardo said, it helped him that they weren't supportive, right? I think mine was definitely the opposite, as far as my parents were so supportive of all my little super, I'd been making films since I was 10 and making Super 8 films and wanting to go to USC like Mr. Shuman here. And, it's interesting because Matt, you and I were talking earlier about when you come out of USC, to really, the challenge is that if your parents, there were a lot of kids in my class, at least, that were industry kids. But, if your parents are not in the industry, your family's not in the industry, for them to understand the road you're taking after film school, right? Because in my case, my parents were constantly asking me, or telling me, you got to work your way up. You got to pay your dues and work your way up. Pay your dues, of course, but to be a film director, I don't think there is a way to work your way up at all. And I think that's a tricky thing for kids coming out of film school to relay to their parents who've just paid all this tuition and done everything for you. And then to say, listen, there is no working your way up. I got to get in there and just be making films and short films and being on sets. And I think that's one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest things that when we come and talk to USC students about, we like to talk to the parents and tell them like, hey, it's going to be a very tricky time when they come out of school, but be patient. This is not like becoming a hedge fund guy or an investment banker or a doctor or a lawyer, or, sometimes even a TV writer has a certain path to get through into being a staff writer and creating a show. So anyway, I don't know. That was like a long-winded answer, I guess, Mom.
No, it's great. I'm glad you kind of got to that too, because I think that's such a good thing to kind of address. We're kind of at the end of our time here, and I don't really see any more audience questions. So thank you guys. This has been a really, really fun night. I've really been enjoyed talking to all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are you kidding? This is anytime I am lucky enough to make a movie, the first thing I always hope is that I can come to USC and show it and come back to my, what was really the formative years I think Luke too, you had a great time there and you bleed Trojan colors. And so this is always a thrill. So thank you, Alex. And
totally is. Yeah. Thank you, Alex, so much.
I'm really disappointed that your mom declined to come on board as a panel.
She has a big voice, but yeah, I hear you.
Next time,
Mom.
And can we just because I love her so much, you guys have the best dean. She's the best. And I just think everything that the film school is a lot contributed to her. And so if you're watching Dean Daly, I love you and thank you for having us.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing everything with us tonight. This was one of the most entertaining Q&As we've done during COVID, and the show's even better live. So I hope to see you back on campus soon.
Yeah, everyone be safe.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.